Came a snarl. Ooh. But when Buck finished his meal and returned, he found his nest occupied. There came a snarl from the trespasser. It was Spritz. Till now, Buck had avoided trouble with his enemy, but this was too much. The beast in him roared. He sprang upon Spitz with a fury that surprised them both. So there's Buck coming back, and he finds Spitz in his nest under the snow. And boy, this really made him mad. Francois was surprised too when both men rushed out to see the cause of the trouble. Ah, he cried to cheer on Buck. Give it to him, the dirty thief. Spritz and Buck were circling each other with rage and caution. Then suddenly something happened that stopped the fight. Perrault cried out, and Buck heard the sound of a club and a shrill yelp of pain. The camp was alive with strange furry forms, a pack of starving huskies. There were 80 to 100 of them. They had smelled the camp from some Indian village and were crazed by the smell of food. Now, the reference to Indian village here is not a village in your country, because we used to call the Native Americans Indians here. So anyway, these dogs were wild dogs, and there was 80 to 100 of them. Ooh, where's my picture? I can't see it. There it is. So this big pack of dogs came into the camp, and they were starving. And so guess what they did? What do you think they did?
I did.
Yeah, they started fighting, but if they were starving, what were they looking for?
I didn't know.
If you're starving, you're very, very hungry. So they were looking for food. So in an instant, the skinny brutes scrambled for the bread and the bacon in the grub box. The men used their clubs with no effect. The wild dogs yelped and howled under the blows, but struggled madly till the last crumb was eaten. The sled dogs burst out of their nests, only to be attacked by the fierce wild huskies. Never had Buck seen such dogs. They were like skeletons with blazing eyes and frothing fangs, leaping toward the sled dogs. Frothing fangs. A fang is like a big tooth. The dog has fangs for biting and fighting and eating. And frothing means they were like white with foam. They were foaming at the mouth. Buck's head and shoulders were ripped and slashed. Billy was crying as usual. Dave and Sullock dripped with blood, fighting bravely side by side. Joe snapped fiercely upon an invader's leg. Pike finished the job. Buck flung himself upon one, then another, till he felt teeth sink into his own throat. It was Spitz attacking him from the side. Perrault and Francois hurried to save their sled dogs. The wild, starving beasts fled, and Buck shook himself free of Spitz, but it was only for a moment. The men then ran back to save the rest of the food, and the huskies returned to attack the team. Billy sprang through the savage circle and fled away over the ice. Pike and Dub followed on his heels, with the rest of the team behind. As Buck drew himself together to spring after them, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Spitz rush upon him. He took the brunt of Spitz's charge, then joined the fight out on the frozen lake. Later, the 9 team dogs gathered together in the forest. There was not one of them who was not wounded in 4 or 5 places. Dub was badly injured in a hind leg. Dolly, the last husky added to the team, had a badly torn throat. Joe had lost an eye. The good-natured Billy, with a ripped ear, cried and whimpered throughout the night. At daybreak, they limped back to camp. The wild huskies had fled, and the two men were in bad moods. Half their food supply was gone. The huskies had chewed through the sled lashings. They had eaten a pair of Perot's moose hide moccasins, chunks out of the leather traces, and even 2 feet of lash from the end of Francois's whip. He looked up from the mess to see to his wounded dogs, wounded with the bites of huskies gone mad. Do you know what moccasins are?
No.
Moccasins are shoes made out of leather, and they usually have the fur left on them so that they help to keep your feet warm.
That are also made for dogs?
Well, you'll see here just a minute. Ah, my friends, he said softly, maybe it make you mad dog, those many bites. Maybe all mad dog. What you think, Perot? So these dogs that attacked, Francois was worried that they might be sick with rabies. Do you know what rabies is?
No.
It's a disease that causes animals to go crazy, and they have no sense, and they just eventually they die. But before they die, they get real crazy and they fight, and they do they would fight and attack anything. So Francois is worried that these dogs were sick and that they might have infected their own dogs that were fighting them. Anyway, Perot shook his head. With 400 miles of trail still between him and Dawson, he could not afford to have madness break out among his dogs. 2 hours and much hard work later, the harnesses were repaired and the wounded team was underway. The hardest part of the trail between them and Dawson lay before them. So Dawson was the name of a town that they were trying to reach. Okay, the next chapter is called The Fight. And oops, I can't. There it is. So this is, yeah, The Fight. And remember, Spitz was the lead dog of the team, and he didn't like Buck for some reason, and he kept picking fights. So Buck knew that someday they were going to have to fight to the death. One of them was going to die. So this chapter is called The Fight. It took 6 days of toil to cover 30 terrible miles. A dozen times, Perot, nosing the way, broke through the ice, being saved by the long pole he carried. Each time he broke through, he had to quickly build a fire to dry his clothes. Once the sled broke through, pulling Dave and Buck with it. They were half frozen and all but drowned by the time they were dragged out. At another time, Spitz went through, dragging the whole team after him up to Buck, who strained backward with all his strength. Behind him was Dave, straining backward, and behind the sled was Francois, pulling until his tendons cracked and his muscles hurt. So here is the team. They broke through the ice. They were crossing a frozen lake, and they broke through the ice, and then the lead dog, Spitz, pulled everybody down with him. Very dangerous, very, very dangerous. The entire team became exhausted. Perot, to make up lost time, still pushed the tired dogs late and early. Buck's feet were not so compact and hard as the feet of the huskies. All day long, he limped in pain. At camp, he lay down like a dead dog. He could not even move to get his dinner. Francois had to bring it to him. Perrault rubbed Buck's feet for half an hour each night after supper. He cut off the tops of his own moccasins to make 4 moccasins for Buck. So you asked me if there were moccasins for dogs. Well, Francois made moccasins for the dog, for Buck, because his feet were so sore.
Yeah, in USA, there are a lot of people will put that moccasins for their dogs because it's cool to take them out.
Yeah, so now they have little shoes for dogs, but dogs don't really like them. Well, this was a great relief for Buck. One morning, Francois forgot the moccasins, and Buck lay on his back, his 4 feet waving in the air. Perrault grinned at the sight of a dog that refused to budge without his shoes. Later, Buck's feet grew hard to the trail, and the worn-out moccasins were thrown away. One morning, as they were harnessing up, Dolly went suddenly mad. Her long, sad wolf howl sent every dog bristling with fear. She then sprang straight for Buck. He had never seen a dog go mad, and he fled in a panic. Dolly, foaming at the mouth, ran wildly after Buck. At Francois's call, Buck circled back into camp. Here, the dog driver waited with the axe, which he brought down on the crazed, sick Dolly. So he had to kill that dog. He had to kill Dolly. And remember, they said that they were worried about the wolf pack that attacked them, that they might be mad, that they might have this disease that causes madness. And they were worried that this madness might spread to their sled dogs. Well, Dolly got it, so she had to be destroyed. Okay, so Buck staggered over to the sled, exhausted, sobbing for breath. This was Spitz's opportunity. He sprang upon Buck, and twice his teeth sank in and ripped the flesh to the bone. Then Francois's lash cracked, and Buck watched Spitz receive the worst whipping yet given to any of the team. "One devil, dat Spitz," remarked Perrault. "Someday him kill dat Buck." "Dat Buck is 2 devils," said Francois reply. "All de time I watch dat Buck, I know for sure. Listen, some fine day him get angry and then him chew dat Spitz all up. Sure, I know." So they knew that these 2 dogs were someday going to fight, and they were trying to decide who they thought would be the winner, I guess. Anyway, from then on, it was war between Buck and Spitz. Spitz, as lead dog, had battled many dogs before, but Buck was different. He was smarter. He was more patient. Buck wanted the leadership position. He wanted it because it was his nature. He wanted it because he was gripped with a pride that matched the pride of Spitz. One morning after a heavy snowfall, Pike did not appear. He was hidden in his nest under a foot of snow. Francois called for him, but he still did not come. Spitz was wild with anger that a dog would disobey. He raged through the camp, smelling and digging until he found Pike in his hiding place. So Spitz was the lead dog, so he was kind of the leader of the whole team. And when Pike didn't come one morning, this made Spitz mad, and he went out looking for him. So anyway, Spitz flew at Pike to punish him. Just then, Buck flew with his equal rage in between. Surprised, Spitz was hurled backward and off his feet. Pike joined the fight, and Buck also sprang upon Spitz. But Francois, chuckling at the fight, brought his lash down upon Buck with all his might. Half stunned, Buck was knocked backward, and the lash fell upon him again and again, while Spitz soundly punished Pike. In the days that followed, as Dawson grew closer and closer, Buck continued to interfere between Spitz and the other dogs. But he was crafty, waiting until Francois was not around. The team went from bad to worse. Things no longer went right. There was constant nipping and yelping, and at the bottom of it all was Buck. He kept Francois busy, watching out for the life and death struggle between Spitz and Buck that he knew would take place sooner or later. They pulled into Dawson one dreary afternoon, with the great fight still to come. Here, many men and countless dogs all at work. All day they swung past up and down Main Street in long teams, and in the night their jingling bells still went by. So I don't know if this is a picture of a map, and way up here at the top of the map is the town Dawson. See that little black dot? I think everything's backwards. You can't read the words because they're backwards for you, but they were trying to reach this town called Dawson up in the Yukon. Here and there, Buck met Southland dogs like himself, but most were the wild wolf husky breed. Every night, regularly at 9, at 12, and 3, they howled the eerie old song, and Buck joined them, the new Buck, the primordial beast. Primordial beast would be the beast in him that was ancient, long time ago, like his ancestors that were wild. So he was feeling that wildness and he joined in their howling. The team rested for a day, then got back on the trail. They made splendid progress, but Buck kept stirring up trouble along the way. They no longer worked as one dog in the traces. Spitz was no longer a leader who was feared or respected. Pike robbed him of half a fish one night and gulped it down under the protection of Buck. Another night, Dub and Joe fought Spitz and watched him take the punishment that they deserved. And even Billy, the good-natured, grew more brave. Buck never came near Spitz without snarling and bristling. Francois became furious with the team. His lash was always singing among the dogs, but it did little good. When his back was turned, the dogs were at it again. Francois knew Buck was behind all the trouble, and Buck knew Francois knew. Buck was too clever to ever be caught red-handed. One night after supper, Dub turned up a snowshoe hare, and in a second, the whole team was in a full cry. A hare is a rabbit. See that little rabbit?
All the dogs were chasing the rabbit.
Yeah, they were all chasing the rabbit, and that rabbit was called a snowshoe hare, Hare. 100 yards away was a camp of the Northwest Police with 50 Huskies who joined the rabbit chase. The rabbit sped down the river and turned off into a small creek up the frozen bed. Buck led the pack, 60 strong, around bend after bend, but he could not gain. His splendid body flashed forward, leap by leap, in the pale white moonlight. And leap by leap, the snowshoe rabbit flashed on ahead. Buck still led the pack, running the wild thing down. But Spitz, cold and crafty, left the pack and cut across a piece of land along the creek. Buck did not know of this. As Buck rounded the bend, he saw a large, frosty shadow leap into the path of the rabbit. It was Spitz. The rabbit could not turn, and Spitz's white teeth seized it. Buck made no sound, but drove in upon Spitz, shoulder to shoulder, so hard that he missed the throat. They rolled over and over in the powdery snow. Spitz gained his feet almost as though he had not been overthrown, slashing Buck's shoulder and leaping clear. In a flash, Buck knew it. The time had come. It was fight to the death. As they circled about, snarling, ears laid back, Buck's instincts took over. He seemed to remember it all. The white woods, the earth, the moonlight, and the thrill of battle. The air was silent, and the wolf huskies circled, their eyes gleaming. Spitz knew how to fight, and whenever Buck lunged, he was met with quicker fangs. Time and time again, he leaped at Spitz, and each time, Spitz slashed him and got away. Spitz was untouched, while Buck was streaming with blood and panting hard. The fight was growing desperate. Once Buck flipped over, and the whole circle of 60 dogs started up. But he recovered himself almost in midair, and the circle sank down again and waited. Buck was smart, smarter than any dog Spitz had known. He rushed, pretended to go for the shoulder, but at the last instant he swept in low and closed in on Spitz's left leg. The bone broke, and the white dog faced him on 3 legs. Buck tried again to knock him over, and then swept in to break the other leg. Despite the pain and helplessness, Spitz struggled to keep up. So this was the fight to the death. And Buck broke both of
The script.
Buck broke both of Spitz's front legs, so he couldn't stand up. So there was no hope for Spitz, and there was no mercy. Buck readied for the final rush. A pause seemed to fall. Every animal stood still as though turned to stone. Then Buck sprang in, delivered the final bite, and sprang out. No more would Spitz stand in his way. Buck was again the king.
In this story, I understand one thing.
What?
Spirit was so greedy about he was win, is it?
He was the leader of the team, so he was always in front. But he didn't like Buck, and he always tried to bully him.
And he was also too greedy.
Also to what?
Greedy.
Greedy. Yes, he was greedy. He wanted all of the power, and Buck was too much like Spitz, I guess. He wanted power too. He wanted to be the lead dog. He wanted to be the most important dog. Anyway, he and Spitz were always fighting and always upset with each other. So
And did this. Who were too greedy, they would fail all the time.
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's a good lesson. So we learned some new words today. Primitive, meaning not modern, the opposite of anything modern, be way back in ancient history. Moccasins were a kind of a shoe made out of leather, the animal skin that still had the fur on it. And then Francois made moccasins for Buck one time because Buck's feet were so sore from the snow.
Pronoun word. In the old time, in this time, using the plates to eat. In that time, they used the leaves to put their food and eat.
Yeah, I guess so. At that time, they were out in the wild, and they really didn't have anything or anyone to help them. They were on their own, and they got into trouble several times when they fell through the ice. The trail was across frozen lakes sometimes, and they would fall through the ice, and then of course they almost drowned, and they almost froze to death, and it was really a hard journey.
And if it was in the some people in the desert, in the morning they were traveling to one place, it is too hard, and they also don't have water. And in one fact you listen, corridor made out in the desert means the people who working in the desert take some milk for if water will dry up, they think milk will not dry up and they take in milk. With the sunshine, the milk was getting too hard. After some time, it will cool down and it will turn into curd. I saw it.
Yeah, right. So is that in a story that you read?
No, that's fact.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
Well,
also learned a new thing today.
what's that?
I use it when circles and I make a small notebook. It has pages.
Oh, I see. And so what does that do? What do you do with that?
I can write anything.
Oh, so it's like,
Or we can, if we forgot any vegetables to buy, we can write in this and we can take it out. And in the bike or car, we can put it and we can put in dicky or we can put in the seat side.
nice. So you made a little circular tablet.
Yes, I used one round ball like this, like a nail polish cap. I used circles and cut them up and added glue for it. I also made one more. I had two, and this another one is in our bedroom.
Okay. So you were busy making little tablets. That's nice. Now you can use it to keep your list, your shopping list. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, listen, we're out of time for today, and we're only about halfway through the book. We still have half the book to go. So it'll take us a few more times to get through the book. And then I have some other fun books to read, but I want you to read too. I have one called Hooray for Wadney. I think you're looking at it backwards. Hooray for Wadney. This was a mouse or a rat who couldn't say his R's. And then I have a book called Thunder Cake I want to read to you. These are just fun little picture books. They're fun little picture books. So after we read this,
Twinkle book, Twinkle.
I don't have that book.
That's nice. And they had pictures. And it's for
And
the love of adventure. Look at this so cute.
For the Love of Autumn. That's
The love of
autumn. Yeah, that's a fun little book.
so funny because like some people faces and they had thought like this and some people will write it on it. There are 13 lessons are there. That's an English book.
All right. Do you think you could write me a sentence or two with moccasin?
Yes.
All right, let me spell it for you. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. M O
M O
C C
C C
A
A
S
S
I
I
N.
N. Can you write few sentences?
Yes, would you?
I brought a pink color moccasins for my fluffy Leo dog.
Yes. Okay, so you understand what they are. They're shoes made of leather, and they usually have the fur left on them. And
Yes, they
they're
also means like it's small dogs will be white color fluffy dogs. When they go out, they stay cold. Their owners will put them on and take them for a walk.
yeah. That's right. Okay, can you read what's on my shirt? I don't know, it might be backwards. I think it's backwards. Anyway, it says Alaska. Alaska. That's way north and west of Canada, but it's one of the United States, and that's kind of the country that Francois and Perrault were taking their sled, and they were in the upper part of the Yukon, and part of that was very near to Alaska. Anyway, okay, well.
Aunt had a nickel shirt, nickel pant, nickel shoes, nickel sock. She's wearing everything nickel. I saw it.
Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna say goodbye to now, and we'll meet on Wednesday again. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll see you on Wednesday, and you're gonna write a couple of sentences with moccasin.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good evening, and I'll see you Wednesday.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, Mamo.
Moccasin.
నువ్వేం చేస్తున్నావు అసలు
ఈ రోజు మా అమ్మ చితకొట్టింది నన్ను.